Two men went to worship service. Same worship service, same time, same building, same preacher, same congregation. One walked out, told the preacher he wouldn't be back. What's the problem? Well, the problem is the air conditioning's too cold. Preacher preaches too long. Elders won't listen to you. And song leader leads terrible songs. A few minutes later, second guy walks out. Same service now, mind you. He walks out. He says, "Oh, I was so blessed. I was so blessed to be here." Said the sermon was wonderful. Preacher did a good job preaching wonderful topic. Said, "I just talked to one of the elders. Said he's really blessed my life." Said the song service was great. Said, "I never heard a Mighty Fortress sung so wonderfully." Said the temperature of the building was just right. Everybody was feeling loving and kind, and just a wonderful experience. What's the difference? The difference was attitude. Two people looking same thing, seeing, feeling something completely different. Don't tell me it doesn't happen. While that story is not a Paul Daugherty story, I've had similar happen to me. And so, yes, it is, but it's all about attitude. Attitude is important. Attitude is everything. We bring our series of victory to a close. We've been talking about victory over different things. And tonight I want us to talk about victory over bad attitude. Because our attitude, as the old saying goes, often determines our altitude. How high we fly is determined by what kind of attitude we have. We have to look at several things. What I want us to do tonight is a very simple lesson, and maybe we won't take as long as we have for some of these. I want us to have an overview, first of all, of bad attitude and attitude in general. And then I want us to say, well, how do we have victory over it? Let's talk about, first of all, when we say attitude, what do we mean? Well, Webster defines attitude as a state of mind or disposition of someone or something. If you're like me, you read that and you go, huh? So you have to think about it for a few minutes. But it's the way you feel and ultimately the way you act on maybe some people, some events, whatever it might be. Your state of mind, your disposition towards someone or something. Often influenced, as we'll see, by life itself. But what's the importance of a good attitude? Well, we need a good attitude. Why? Because attitude determines our altitude. Attitude is important because attitude affects our relationship. Attitude affects the way we view life. Attitude affects the way we deal with life. Attitude affects the way we ultimately, as we said, deal with people. And so it's important that we have a good attitude. And strange enough, you might say, well, I don't think the Bible talks about attitude. Oh, it does. Let me give you one. I'll give you several verses tonight, but let me give you one. In Philippians chapter 2, Paul said, "Let this mind be in you, which is also in Christ Jesus." Attitude. Attitude. Attitude is important. Attitude is important to God. And it's important that we have a good, right attitude. Attitude determines, as we said, how we deal with people, how we deal with events in life, and how we deal with life, how we go through life. Well, what kind of attitude do you have? That's always important. Do you have a good positive attitude? Do you have a negative attitude? Suzanne and I know of a lady that has a very positive attitude. She's always smiling. It doesn't matter what goes on in her life. She is always smiling. You ask yourself, how in the world? And I overheard the conversation. Which just kind of tickled my fancy. There was one of our deacons that went up to her. We were out caroling for Christmas one year. And he said, "I just want to know something." She said, "Okay." He said, "You're always smiling. You're always happy." He said, "What gives?" She said, "Years ago, when I was just a small child, there was a lady that used to come see my mom every once in a while." Said she was a very happy lady. Said she was smiling all the time. She was happy. And I just made up my mind right then that that's the type of individual I wanted to be. And so here I am. And so she is. And she has blessed many of lives, blessed our lives, Suzanne and my lives, tremendously through the years. But how do you go about determining what kind of attitude you have? Because here's the thing. Most of us think our attitude's all right, when it might be just downright rotten. Most of us, well, we're all right. You know, I got a good attitude. I got a good state of mind. I got a good disposition towards people. Everything looks good to me. Well, does it really? Because ultimately, you define your attitude in one of two ways, negative or positive. You see, many attitudes can be had. You can have a smiling attitude. You can have a cheerful attitude. You can have a joyful attitude. You can have a crabby, no good, rotten, stinking, miserable, negative attitude. You can have either one. Usually, people don't have in the middle. Now, sometimes the negative person might slip up every once in a while and have a good attitude because something good happened. And a positive individual with good attitude, something might have happened in life that all of a sudden, at least for a little while, their attitude's bad. Well, how do you determine? Well, look at yourself. Ask yourself, am I happy or am I grouchy most of the time? Am I an individual that loves people? Or am I an individual that tolerates people? Am I an individual that sees the sun shining, or am I an individual that's waiting for the rain to come? Am I an individual that truly likes to be around people and loves people? Or am I an individual that really wants to be in seclusion? Am I an individual that sees the events of the day and realizes that God's in control? Or am I an individual that sees the skies falling all the time? You see how the process goes? I could give you a long checklist, but I'll save you. But you see how the process is going. We have to spend time, as we'll see in just a few minutes, we have to spend time looking at ourselves and being honest with ourselves. I think I referred to it a couple of weeks ago. A couple of weeks ago on Sunday night, Suzanne was watching Steel Magnolias. And I've seen it a time or two with her, noticed with her. But anyway, there's a character there that is grouchy. I think it was played by Shirley MacLaine. Anyway, she's grouchy, she's irritable. And Sally Fields, I believe, was the other character that had gotten a job with a counseling center. And they said, well, maybe, he called her name, said, you ought to see if you can get an appointment. And I'll misquote this, so I'll just say this was a kind of a paraphrase of what she said. She said, I'm not crazy. She said, I've only been in a bad state of mind for 40 years. Well, you have to stop and analyze yourself. I would say that counseling would have helped her, and she should have gone. Now, I believe in counseling, by the way. And so, but you have to determine where you are, and you determine who you are. And then determining that, you have to say, well, where did all this come from? Well, usually the origin of your attitude comes from several different things. But it ultimately comes from you. Now, let's look at it several different ways, or two different ways. Where does it come from? It comes from life. It comes from the people that you've been around, how you were raised, and how life has treated you. You might say, oh, no. Yeah, it does. It does. If you feel like you've had a good life, if you feel like folks have been as fair and honest with you as they have anybody else, and you have been treated at least fairly and honestly, you're all right. If your mom and dad were positive people, or at least people that saw good, you've got a good leg up. But if mom and dad were crotchety and mom and dad just were sour upon the world and everything was negative and everything was bad and everything was rotten, then you're going to catch some of that. Ultimately, though, our attitude is our responsibility. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he, Proverbs 23:7. But let's go back to Mark chapter 12. Jesus made a statement there in verse 35. He makes a statement. He says that a good man out of the treasures of his heart brings forth that which is good, and an evil man out of the evil treasures of his heart brings forth that which is bad. Now, once again, you look at that, you go, huh? But you think about it. A good man out of his heart. Attitude starts the heart. Attitude starts with us. And it starts with us having the right thoughts. It starts with us having the right frame of mind. It starts with us as remembering several things. And like I say, this is what we're fixing to cover. Well, how do you overcome a bad attitude? But here's the crux of the matter. If you believe God's in control, then you believe everything in life will work out. And if you believe everything in life will work out, you can move forward and you can have a good attitude. That's kind of what we're going to say the rest of the night in a nutshell. So your attitude comes from you. You are personally responsible for your attitude. And your attitude can be good or it can be bad. It can affect me ever how you want to. But I'm not going to let it affect me negatively. Oh, I might think about it for a day or two, and I might stew on it for a little while. But I'm not going to let you overcome me. I'm not going to let you, as one lady kind of defined it to me, I'm not going to let you rent space in my head forever and make me feel bad about me. That's a pretty good way of putting it. So if you want to be mean and you want to be crotchety and you want to be a person that's just negative, okay. But I hope you'll rethink as we think tonight. How do we have a good attitude? And so while I could tell you, okay, here's how you have a good attitude, let me just tell you some things that if you do these things, it will help you in your attitude. Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to start with a self-inventory. Where are we? We have to consider ourselves. We have to see where we are. We have to look at ourselves. That's what the Bible reminds us does in 2 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 5. Paul said, examine yourself to see whether you be in the faith. You might say, well, wait a minute, preacher. That's talking about whether you're a child of God or not. Absolutely. But the same principle applies. Haggai reminded the children of Israel to whom he was preaching. He says, you need to consider your ways. You need to think about where you are, who you are, and what you are. We need to stop and think about what we can do and what we can't do. We have to stop and think about who are we? Do we have a negative attitude? Do we have a positive attitude? Ben Franklin had said that he got up every morning before he went out, he spent time thinking about what can I do today? Especially what can I do to be good to others, to do good for others. And then it was said at the close of the day that he spent a little time thinking about what did I do today? Where can I improve? Well, that's a pretty good short list, 2 questions. We need to consider ourselves, think about ourselves, think about where we are, who we are. We oftentimes think about what? That other guy. They were awful. Their attitude stinks. They were terrible. They were mean. They were cruel. They talked to me ugly. They did. Get off yourself. But take a little inventory of yourself and look at yourself. Where am I? Who am I? How do I fit in? What have I been blessed with? What have I been given? What can I use? And so you take a little bit of self-inventory, and that helps you develop a good attitude. Well, how and why? Well, keep following us tonight. We'll see. Second of all, learn to look on the good side. Be an optimist. Look on the good side. Be like the lady that we've talked about before that met her husband at the door and said, honey, good news. 4 out of 5 children did not break an arm today. Look at the good side. Develop the good ideas, the good prospects, the good thoughts. Look at it from a standpoint of good. Stories told of a lady that was in a nursing home. All week, it had been one of those kind of wintry type days all week long. Dreary, cloudy, rainy. And so, nurse came in towards the end of the week. Nurse came in to close blinds. She thought this good lady in this room, laid in this bed, watched all that terrible weather all week long, that the closed blinds were better than the open blinds. And so she started to close blinds. And sweet lady in the bed said, no, I'll leave them open. The sun may shine, and I don't want to miss it. I want to see it. How do you look at life? Do you look at the good? Do you look at the bad? Do you consider what's bad in others? You know, Jesus said, judge not that you be not judged, for with what judgment you judge, you should be judged. With what measure you meet, it should be measured to you. And then he talks about the speck and the beam, right? But how do you look at your life? Do you look at it positively? Do you look at the good side? Is the gas tank half full or half empty? Is the sun shining or is it fixing to rain? Has it been a good day or has it been not a good day? How do you look at it? How do you see? How do you see the events in your life going? If we begin to look on the good side, if we begin to look on the positive side, if we begin to look and see the good instead of the bad, see what happened that was good today instead of what failed, we develop a better outlook to life. Count your blessings and not your troubles. Next, get past it. Whatever it is in the past, whatever happened to you in the past that has really hurt you, I'm sorry for. And so's God. And I know you would say, well, preacher, I'm sorry more than you are for it. I got that. But what we have to learn to do is simply get past the past. We have to bury the past. Forget the past. Let the past go. I know in talking to people that there are some things that happened to us in the past that are just so horrendous that you have to learn to deal with them, and you can't completely forget them because they'll crop up on you every once in a while. They'll just hit you like a ton of bricks. And I get that. But the idea of harboring bad feelings, ill will, contempt for those that have done something to you is contrary to the very will of God. God makes us, or should I say, tells us to forget the things that are behind. Jesus said in Luke chapter 9, verse 62, no man having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. Now you might say, preacher, that's talking about perseverance within faith. I agree. But the principle is what? Don't look back. Don't look back. Life moves on. I have in the past done a series of lessons, not here, but other place, called Moving Forward. And it's all about life that moves forward. Whether it's somebody said something to you, somebody did something to you, there are examples in the Bible, there's principles in the Bible that show just move on. Paul said, forgetting those things which are behind. Now I want you to think about that. That's a passage you're very familiar with, Philippians 3, verse 13. But I want you to think about that. I want you to think about that from this time frame. That was written about 62 AD, right at the close of the book of Acts. Now, go back in Paul's life. Go back, we'll have to go very far back, and we find a list in 2 Corinthians 11th chapter. In 2 Corinthians 11th chapter, Paul talks about the shipwrecks that he went through, the beatings, the stonings, right? They are still in Paul's mind. Paul still remembers. And I'm sure when Paul writes to the church of Corinth, 2 Corinthians, this is, like I say, this is before he writes the book of Philippians. Now just follow along with me. He writes and he talks about it. He says, man, I suffered shipwreck. I suffered tumults and I suffered beatings. And I'm sure that when he wrote that, he probably thought of each one of those times. But times move forward. And he says, forgetting the things which are behind. What's he saying? Well, within the context there, the greater context, he's talking about all the things within the church of Philippi. But within the greater context and the application of the principle is this. Those things of the past did not affect the way he was in the present and the way he planned to be in the future. And so we have to learn to get past the very things that are going on, to truly forbear one another and forgive one another, Colossians 3, verse 13. And so whatever's in your past, like I say, I'm sorry for it, God's sorry for it, and I know you're sorry for it, but move on. Move on. Deal with it and move on. Next, count your blessings. Boy, we've all been blessed, haven't we? To paraphrase Solomon in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 26, it's interesting. Now, Solomon is in Ecclesiastes, the book of Ecclesiastes. Solomon is searching for happiness. And the first 9 chapters of the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon is searching for happiness in a lot of places, especially in the first 3 chapters of Ecclesiastes. Where is he searching for happiness? Well, he's searching for happiness in women, in wealth, in wine, things of this world. And he gets to Ecclesiastes chapter 2, and basically, to paraphrase, he says that he thought that man ought to look at his work and be able to enjoy life. Now, we're going to take the principle, because the context there, he's talking about this is where I thought happiness was found, in just sitting back and enjoying life and all the pleasures of life. But take the principle and understand, of course, we do it within the context of God. That was in the context of living in the world. We put it in the context of living for God and say that's a great idea. To be thankful for what you have. To count your blessings, to understand what God has given to you. It's the Lord that daily blesses us. It's the benefits that we have. And so we're to be, as Paul said in Ephesians 5, verse 20, that we're to give thanks always for all things to God the Father in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Always thankful. You might say, preacher, what in the world does that have to do with attitude? You're changing your attitude. By instead of counting your miseries and counting your problems and counting the difficulties of life and counting everything that's not going your way and all the negatives, you're all of a sudden counting the positives. So you've changed your thought pattern. You've changed your thought process. Now all of a sudden the gas tank's not half empty, it's half full. Now all of a sudden the thought of that you would have never had of 3 or 4 out of 5 children didn't break their arm, you've all of a sudden developed that wine because you're happy. And now all of a sudden when things don't go your way, all of a sudden when there's more month than there is money, all of a sudden when your neighbor doesn't treat you the way you think that they ought to treat you, you're looking at the good. You're seeing a neighbor that maybe is not doing everything they should, but they're still a good neighbor because they're not stealing your stuff. You're still looking at life and you're saying, I got home today and guess what? Car's not running right, but at least somebody didn't run over me and I'm not in the hospital because of it. You're beginning to look at the good side. And so you count your blessings. Don't like the troubles that have gone through. I don't like the trouble. If you ever walk away and say, Brother Paul must be a sadomasochist. He must really love issues and problems. Now, I know the fellow you had before me, Jerry Barber, said that he loves criticism, he loves problems. Let me tell you, he does not. I'm not calling him a liar. I just think that his head's messed up. Amen to that, right? But when we learn to look on the good side of things and we turn and count our blessings, because there's always, whatever you're going through, there's always a worse scenario, a worse problem, a worse situation, and probably somebody else has experienced it. And so learn to count your blessings and be thankful for what you have. Next, be an ambassador for good. Be an ambassador for good. Paul talked about that in 1 Timothy 6, verse 8. That he went about doing good, to paraphrase it. We should be individuals that seek to do good. Had a young man stop by the house a while ago. He wanted to do something over here at the church building. He'd noticed something. He wanted to do something. And I'm not so sure about that we would ever want that done. But he said, and this is what he said, I use your parking lot a lot through the week, and I just want to return the favor. I said, well, that would actually go through a lot of folks. And thank you, but come to church. And he said, well, I go to church. He told me where he went to church, told me where his kids go to daycare and so forth and so on. But it was kind of an interesting conversation. I'm going to take him at face value and take him that he was honest and that everything was above board then. That's the way he presented himself. And I thought, there's a young guy really trying to do good. You and I all need to be ambassadors to do good for somebody. That's why I think all of you were at the meeting a while ago. We're going to, in September, we're going to talk about, the 5260 Club. 52 weeks out of the year, send one card a week to somebody. I think we can all do that. I think we can all be an ambassador for good, for somebody. And it doesn't have to be the same people, and it doesn't have to be always. But we have to go about doing good. And when we start doing good, we're looking for good. And when we're looking for good, we're feeling good. And guess what's happening? Our attitude's changing. But then we learn to smile. Do you know that you can actually harvest smiles? You really can. It's surprising what you can gain. Paul taught this in Galatians 6. Preacher, Paul said nothing about smiling in Galatians 6. He says, whatsoever man sows, that shall he also reap. Do you know if you sow a smile, you'll reap a smile? Try it. Go to the store. Everybody that passes you, smile at them. Just smile at them. Now, first of all, if the police don't come get you when you and say, we figured you were up to something. No. But if you smile at people, they'll smile back at you. If they'll look away from their phone at you, they'll smile at you. It's just amazing. I had thought about, and I may still Wednesday night do this. Do you know people in Nashville will wave at you? Now, I don't recommend driving down the interstate trying to wave at everybody that's passing you by. Zoom, 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 zoom. Don't imagine. But on my walks at night, and I don't get to go but maybe a couple of times a week, but I was just thinking about this the other night. I went for a walk, and it started right about here. I walked from the house, and I got up right about here, and I heard a motorcycle coming. There was a motorcycle guy that came. When he came, I didn't turn around. I just threw up my hand. And I saw him. He was driving down the road, and he kind of had his finger up. He'd waved at me. Well, I rounded the corner, and I met I don't know how many people or how many cars. I waved at each one of them. Every one of them waved back. I climbed that huge hill, and there was a man and a wife and their two little children out watering some of their flowers. I waved at them. They waved back, and I said hello, and they said hello. I went around then that little cul-de-sac up there, and there was another guy and his wife right there on their front step, and I said, hello, and they said, hello. I gathered all that up and put it in my garden that evening. I went home tired but satisfied. I'd met some good folks. No, I didn't get the phone numbers, didn't get their address. Some of them, they were right at their house. That wasn't the purpose. But we need to understand, we need to remember that we need to learn to smile at people, and we wave, and we can talk to people, and we can reap those good things that we have planted. And when you reap those good things that you plant, what happens? You begin to feel good about yourself. And your attitude begins to change. You see the sunshine instead of the clouds. You see the good instead of the bad. You see the positive in people instead of the bad. Does that mean that the world has changed? No. But it means your attitude has changed. And guess what? You become that light of the world, that city set on a hill which cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel basket, but put it on a candlestick for all men to see. And so when Paul said in Philippians chapter 2, do all things without murmuring and complaining, he was saying be a good, positive Christian. And so that wonderful little bitty book of Philippians that we've often talked about, how that Paul was in prison, Paul writes to joy and rejoice. How did he do that? Well, it wasn't because he had some mental issue. It was because he'd understood that if he looked at himself, if he looked on the good side, if he got past the past, he counted his blessings, he became an ambassador for good, and he learned to smile, that the Word will smile with him. And that's how we overcome a bad attitude. We affect other people. Whether we realize it or not, whether we think about it or not, we affect other people. How do you do that? Well, think about what Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 6. 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 6, Paul says, nevertheless, God, that comforts those that are cast down, comforts us with the coming of Titus. Do what? Paul said, Titus came, and he brought me comfort. Put together a list of folks. You don't have to do this in a hard study, but the number of people that did something for somebody, that brought a blessing to the lives of others. Paul said Titus. Paul also mentioned in the book of Philippians a fellow by the name of Epaphroditus. Paul will also mention in the book of Romans, he'll mention two fellows by the name of Stephanus and Archias. Now that gets your list started. The folks that did good, and I believe affected Paul positively. We affect others. Our attitude affects others. And so the Bible says, have a good attitude. I hope that you do, and I hope that you will. This evening, if you're not a New Testament child of God, or you're an individual that needs to come and rededicate your life, won't you come? All together we stand and sing.